Hey everyone, Matt Sitter here, CEO of AFN. At AFN, we believe change is where opportunity happens. A lot more change in the world, maybe in the past few years than we had anticipated, but we believe the best way to take advantage of change is to have a network that is diverse in experience, expertise, and perspective. We do our events to bring subject matter experts to help us think about some of the things that are important within our lives and work. Today, I'm really excited to have Rusty Zimmerman here. I met Rusty at a Hall of Fame induction for him at our high school. We were there at different times, but I got the privilege of hearing him and his story. There was a lot that really struck me about it. Rusty is founder and artist of the Free Portrait Project. Lives out in Brooklyn. We're going to be talking a lot about the Free Portrait Project and how this actually changed how you think about your community, can change how you think about a network as well. So really good conversation. I'm looking forward to it. Rusty, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Thanks for being here, y'all. And thanks for giving me the opportunity to share the work that I've been doing.
Absolutely. So can you just describe the Free Portrait Project to us a little bit?
Certainly. The Free Portrait Project is an effort to paint a portrait of a place through its people by giving 200 free oil-painted portraits painted from life within the moment recorded oral histories of each of these people within a community to make a picture of that place at this moment in time, both in spoken oral histories and in portraits that each individual will, at the culmination, get to take home and keep as their own for free. And also to generate conversations and promote interaction between people who might not otherwise ever say hello to one another, whether it be through geographic or cultural, socioeconomic boundaries, and showing people the thin threads of parallel that connect them in order to catalyze those interactions.
That's fantastic. I like the idea of connecting people who would not be connected otherwise. What made you want to do this to begin with?
Well, it started from a very selfish place. I have been a portrait painter. I've been a painter and an illustrator for many years, and I wanted to, like pretty much probably every other painter, be better at what I do. And I thought that practice is going to be the only thing that'll help me improve my craft. Painting portraits on a regular basis, that painting from life is both better practice and much more engaging to have another human being in the room with you while you're working, and to have a live subject that you can interact with. And if I was to paint from models, hired models every day, those cost $20 to $25 per hour. And if I waited for clientele who could afford to spend $2,000 per sketch portrait from life, then unfortunately at that moment, my demand, my list of folks waiting to get their portrait wasn't that long yet. And so I asked folks, I said, how did you get to be a better painter? And this one fella, Dorian, said, well, I just gave them away. I gave away hundreds of them to friends and neighbors. And I said, oh, I'll do that. That sounds very simple. And so I started to do just that. And it became a regular practice. But then I thought, oh, this is getting in the way of how do I make my own living as a working artist in New York City if I'm giving away these free things all the time. And so another fellow who went to our high school, a fellow named JP Capulong out in San Jose, California, had done some work in crowdfunding. And he said, you can do this. And he said, you can have the impact that you'd like to have to generate funds, not just to do this for 1 month, for 2 months, but for an entire year, if you make it about something bigger than yourself. For instance, to document a community. And he said, where do you live? I said, Crown Heights, Brooklyn at the time. This was 2014, 2015. And And he said, well, what's that place like? I said, well, it's rapidly changing. The rent is rising. Folks are, rightfully upset about, different aspects of gentrification, people who lived there their entire lives feeling pushed out, and people across, like we were saying earlier, cultural boundaries not interacting as well as they possibly could, despite the area being publicly celebrated for its cultural diversity. Historically Orthodox Jews and Caribbean folks from all across, and a lot of new arrivals. And despite being celebrated for all that, folks just didn't say hello as well as they possibly could. And that alone gave me added reason to start this work. And so with help from friends who knew a lot more than I do about how to generate campaigns and crowdfunding and everything else, was able to raise about $50,000 or $60,000 over the course of a year and a half to make this my full-time job for 1 year, to give these paintings to people to keep, whether they could afford it or not. And the oral history component only came about because one sweet elder woman I'd been told was important. And Miss Yolanda Clark was 94 years old at the time, lived at the center of the neighborhood by Brower Park, and I was told that she was one back and four to the left of Dr. King on the steps in Washington during his famous I Have Dreams speech. And our neighbor Philip Hawkins, who knew us both, he said, you're not going to want to miss what this woman has to say. And you're not going to want to go home to your partner, to your neighbors and say, you should have heard what this woman had to say. You're going to want to record this. And so I have a microphone here. This is where everything happens. That's the chair that everybody sits in. And there's a little microphone there on the edge of the table that plugs into the laptop we're talking on now and records each of these 4-hour sittings with each individual, most of whom come to me as strangers. And so I learned simple audio editing and began recording everyone leading up to Ms. Clark. And while I recorded each person who I'd never met, each person, it turned out, had something notable to say, something that was remarkable as a personal human history. That was an interesting facet of the neighborhood as shown through one person. And it was really worth listening to. And so it turned out that I just kept recording everyone. And the irony is that when I finally got a hold of Miss Clark through our neighbor, Mr. Hawkins, he said she decided she doesn't want to participate. She said she's too old and she's not as beautiful as she once was. She said, you should have gotten me when I was 54 and I was a stunner.
You're 40 years too late?
I was 40 years too late. I can't help that. And I think it's sad that silly vanity kept us and everyone else from hearing what this lady had to say in person and on record. But I'm really glad that interaction spurred me to plug in the microphone and start recording. And I ended up hearing from Hasidic doulas and IT people and police officers and elected officials and folks without homes and other 94-year-olds who had, just received their Purple Heart at the tender age of 99 some years later for storming the beaches at Normandy, and only getting that award later because they stormed the beaches while black. And it turned out that there wasn't just a carbon, like how do you call it, a two-dimensional cutout character of a Caribbean elder. And there wasn't just a two-dimensional cardboard cutout of an Orthodox Jewish man or woman or child. And there wasn't just a cardboard cutout of a hipster to plug into the neighborhood and be like, this kid with the plaid shirt and the glasses and the Parliament cigarettes and the bike and the Pabst Blue Ribbon, had a whole lot more to him than was previously available just upon sight alone.
Right. Portraits as an art form, I would say, you've spoken quite well on what they mean generally. What do you think people's impressions are of portraits? What's the reputation that's around them?
Well, they are historically predominantly for old dead white men and their experiences. And as I will one day be an old dead white man myself, I'm not trying to leave myself out of that or anybody else, but I do think that as a practice, it should be radically democratized to include everyone from all walks of life. And that's one of the main reasons why I do what I do. Portraits, I think, are important because I was talking to this young man. I was telling Matt earlier, we're on a swivel here, so I get to give you guys a tour. And I was talking to this young man, Jamaican fella, over my shoulder, Mr. Wayne March, 23-year-old. And between us kids, I can tell you a secret. While he was out on a restroom break, his girlfriend was here with him, and she said, "I hope he marries me." I said, "Does he know that?" And she said, "No, not yet." I said, "Well, I'll do it. I'll do my best to keep it a secret." But this young man was speaking about his legacy and how he doesn't yet know what that is, but he's really happy to have this as a timestamp on his life, along with a woman named Nicole, who works for the Economic Development Corporation, but stopped that to have more time with her two young children. And she said, "This is going to be a portrait of me when my children were young, when I was just taking a break from that work and getting to do this instead." I always tell everybody that there was a fellow named Marshall McLuhan who famously said that the medium is the message. And while that can sound kind of shapeless, the way I say it is that if you take a person's portrait and you put it on a flyer, just one face on a flyer, and you tack that to a telephone pole, then the message ends up being that person is lost or missing, because they're on a flyer at the side of a milk carton, and I hope somebody finds them. Whereas if you take a portrait of somebody who is, in a frame down like those down the hall there on a museum wall, painted in oils, then oftentimes people say, well, that person must be somehow important or remarkable or notable, worthy of being recorded.
Right. How'd you find these folks? I mean, you showed us the flyer for free portraits. How did you actually get folks to decide they wanted to do this?
Well, the flyers are actually really kind of homespun, folksy, and surprisingly delightfully functional. I've had a number of people come in here and say, I ask everyone, how did you find out about this? Some people say we saw it on the news. Because the first time I got a call from a reporter, we ended up on the television news, and I didn't have a television at the time. So I went to the local pub and I said, "Excuse me, hi, I'm sorry to ask, but do you mind if we turn on channel 12? I'm going to be on the news." And they said, "Okay." And the first story was, "Man hits woman in head with hammer in Union Square." And I said, "That's not me." And the second story was, man kills child with city bus. And I was like, also not me. That is not me either. And then we were at the very end, the sort of positive spin that they call the kicker story in journalistic circles. And I was delighted and kind of validated, edified to find out that we were good news.
Right.
And so other news sources said, "Can we do a story about this?" And we got a lot of free press. And so it ended up having this flood of applicants who saw it on television, saw it in print and web press. But then some folks say, "I saw this flyer taped to a mailbox outside of my daughter's school, and it looked just authentic enough and not scammy that I said, I'll read it.
I'll give it a go. Yeah.
Yeah, and the QR code still worked after being rained on for a couple of days. And then, you know, as I was putting these up, apart from feeling glad that I took the time to ride around town on my bicycle and put up these flyers, I remember putting one in a Dominican chicken rotisserie spot in the window and, you know, talking with the front counter lady and saying, you know, es un proyecto para dar retratos en óleo gratis a toda la gente del sur de Brooklyn. And I thought, in all this time, explaining a project in Spanish about a flyer in English, like, you could have just made a Spanish flyer. And this neighborhood is predominantly Spanish and Chinese mixed. Learn Chinese.
Oh, there you go.
Talk to somebody who does speak Chinese and find out, you know, is this Mandarin, Cantonese, Chinese simplified? What are we working with? And so I had a few people go over the basic flyer I had in Russian and Urdu and Bangladeshi and Yiddish to really make sure that we reach everybody
right.
in their own language, on their own terms. And I have an Indian neighbor who, you know, as I was, you know, showing him the one in Hindi, he said, you don't have to do all that. Other people can read English good enough. But I said, when you see something in your own language, then you say,
meant for you.
This is for me.
Yeah.
I am the target audience.
Yeah. That's great. So, you know, obviously you've got the individual portraits that get put together, people take those with them. How else do people consume what you're creating out of this, whether it's, you know, the individual art pieces or the oral histories? You know, how does this become a lasting project that a lot of people can be a part of?
That's a good question. There are physical ways that everybody gets to do that, and a lot of digital ways as well. The first thing I try to do with all of these paintings as soon as they're dry is get them out into the public in public facing, ground level, glass storefront, exhibition venues, conventional and unconventional, where anyone can see these, to make them hyper accessible, to make them super ubiquitous, that everywhere you go, you see these paintings of people who look like you and also people that you know. And so one block from here, there is a cafe that said, we'd love to. And so I brought 18 frames over. And so these paintings right here behind us are still drying. Oil paint takes between 2 weeks and 300 years to fully dry, depending on whether it's, you know, somebody who just taps it and says that's dry, or a conservator who's like, oh, there's still molecules moving.
Right.
And I hung these 18 paintings up on the wall and included some, you know, wall text placard explaining the project with QR codes so that folks could donate to support the work as it's community and crowdfunded, or to apply for one of the remaining spots. To date, we just finished number 53 out of 200 this year. And so we have 147 remaining spots. And to double back to that question you asked, Matt, about how do we reach everyone? I tell everyone who comes to sit here and everyone that I meet that if we can only paint 200 of these pictures, I say, who makes up the neighborhood to you? Who is the face of this place that you think it wouldn't be a picture of this place without Kelsey Kleiman in there as the school photographer for all the local schools, or Lakeisha Bowers here, who does a lot of community service here in Coney Island. And but once those paintings are up there at the cafe for a month, and we've had a reception that's free and open to the public, and all the people who are in the paintings can get to meet one another, that is my favorite human interaction that happens, when everybody can say, oh, that's you. That's you.
Right.
That's mine. And I happen to be a keeper of everyone else's personal stories. And so I can tell you, that this person has a non-binary child, and that person has a queer kid, and you guys have this thread in common.
Right.
And you both, majored in art, but then ended up in business. And all these little bits that connect everyone, and I can act as a conduit to connect them as well. But
Right.
once those paintings are up for a month, then they go somewhere else. So some of them went from that cafe, which is our home base, and we now have a monthly residency there where I just swap in a new batch as soon as there's a new, pile of 17 that are dry and ready to exhibit every month. And then that first batch went to the Barclays Center where the Brooklyn Nets play. And they said,
Oh,
can
wow.
we put them up in
That's great.
our
Yeah.
exhibit areas? And then I'm currently in this spacious, I'll give the slow motion tour again, this very spacious embarrassment of riches that is a studio with north facing light and broad windows in a complex called Industry City. And I wrote a proposal to this place to say, would you guys like to host this project for 1 year while I create this work? And thankfully they said yes, and they gave me the space. And then they said, can we host the pictures as well? So one batch is going, I've got 30 paintings up here at Industry City next month, and other venues all across Southern Brooklyn were saying, can I have some too? Can I have some too? And we're now in talks with the Center for Brooklyn History, which, as it sounds, a local historical society that is a part of the Brooklyn Public Library. And we're talking about putting up handfuls of these portraits as they emerge and dry and are ready to go out, like a nautilus pattern, starting here at the cafe around the corner, outward to all the branches of the Brooklyn Public Library south of our center, which is called Prospect Park.
Cool. I love hearing that you're the conduit for the rest of the community, and like these people who have things in common that you're like, hey, you ought to talk to Jeff over there or something like that. What has surprised you as you've been learning about the community, things that you hadn't thought about before, and obviously a side effect of doing all these portraits?
Well, oftentimes it's the similarities between so many folks of different backgrounds that stand out to me. And out here in Brooklyn, we've got a lot of, like we were talking about, two-dimensional cardboard cutouts. There's some sort of stereotypes of Brooklyn characters, and yet the people here seem to oftentimes be a microcosm of the bigger world at large. Everybody is concerned about having space that is for them, places in which they feel like they have not just a right to exist, but a right to thrive, and a security in their place. And everybody's got places that they would really like to see flourish, and things in their community that they would like less of, and things they'd like more of. Some folks have said until these new kids started moving in, there weren't organic lemons at the local bodega corner store. And I would have liked an organic lemon before, and I'm happy to have them now, but it makes me feel a certain type of way that they didn't come around until you came around. And I find that everybody's curious about one another, and just needs that little nudge to go and say hello.
Yeah.
And the things that really draw me in are these two moments that happen in every session. One is the one where I find that me and whomever I'm sitting with are twinsies, that we have some really solid. I edit myself out of the audio later on so that it's not just a recording of a conversation, but that it's them telling their story.
Wow.
And
Okay.
I found out that the less I talk, the less I have to delete from the audio. And so I've started using these cues where I'll say, this one means I'm right there with you. And this is, I feel that tremendously. And this is, take your volume up. I can't hear you.
Yeah.
Because I'm a bit hard of hearing. And if I can't hear you, that means the microphone probably can't either.
Yeah.
And so all this to say, we do this a lot, that I'm right there with them, or that, I also had that life experience. And those moments of personal connection are great. But then there's the uncomfortable ones, which is what I call the hour of uncomfortable admission. And I have fun with it. I'll usually tell somebody I have an embarrassing true confession, or I have an uncomfortable admission. And it's usually to say that, say if I meet a person who appears youthful and slight of frame, that I'm surprised to find out that they are 44 and have teenage children, or that I couldn't tell just from looking at a gentleman in his outfit today that he used to be a freestyle battle rapper in Shanghai before arriving here.
I'm assuming these are all true stories.
These are all true stories, yes.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Did you get a battle rap demonstration?
I will periodically. He said that that's kind of not who I am anymore, but I will send you a YouTube link.
All right.
Some of my older work. Whereas once in a while, if I have a musician in the chair and they tell me about a song they were singing or a song they wrote, I say, if you were to, how does that song go? Could you show me a sample? And I lean back and I turn the microphone up, and once in a while folks will sing a song or even just pull out an instrument. I had one fella play a cello during his entire sitting.
That's cool.
It was really, really nice. Really, really lovely afternoon. And that's one of the reasons why I often tell folks that despite giving this stuff away, that I feel like the prime beneficiary of this work.
Sure.
I will publish a segment of each of these oral histories to go with each portrait, so that when folks see it in a gallery or museum or
just a transcript of it?
No, a QR code again.
Okay.
QR code next to the painting, and it says, scan here to Lakeisha's story.
Yeah.
And you can, and then there's an audio excerpt that I published to SoundCloud. And the code goes right there, so you can listen on your phone and hear Lakeisha's story right through the device that you already have in your pocket.
Yeah.
And again, that sprung up out of necessity, because the first batch of these back in 2016 ended up at a museum, and I said, well, can we have those audio docent tour guides where you punch in 172 and listen to number 172? And they said, we don't have the budget for that. We don't have those things. We're a children's museum in Brooklyn. And I said, okay, well, can we put a button on the wall, sort of like one of those pull string on the back of a doll to be like, oh, Lord, I was born in Coney Island. And they said, no, we don't have budget for that either. And QR codes at the time were antiquated and hadn't yet had the revival they had during the pandemic for contact-free menus and whatnot.
Right.
But they were readily accessible. And so that's just how that came to be.
Right. Very cool. When you think about you being a center point for like a lot of these different communities coming together, and you as a center point around it, you said, hey, I'm already connecting some people. What sort of obligation do you feel as the keeper of all these stories as a part of the community and being able to bring it together now?
That's a good question. I think as a center point, a hub of sorts, I think my primary responsibility is to get out from in front of the camera. to get behind it and to take myself out of the audio so that it's not the Rusty show or like, Rusty and everybody else. It's just this place. I'll often tell everyone that I have no business documenting Southern Brooklyn today. And that's why I let everyone else do the talking. And that's why I let everyone nominate themselves and each other and their mother and their child and their pastor. And, the lady who runs the local free libraries at their doorstep. And that's why I let everybody say, who you should paint? And I just say, bring them to me.
Right.
Beyond that, as a keeper of people's personal information, I treasure it and I have to respect the heck out of it because I didn't know that I was in the oral history business. I was just, recording these things to share in a very informal way. But then a local oral historian approached me and he said, "Did you know you're making a community oral history?" I said, "No." He said, "Well, you are." And
congratulations.
Yeah. He said, "Here are a few tips. Number one, respect the trust that people put into sharing their personal lives with you. Because if you decide, for instance, I met a man who was a musician, world traveler, many big stages, and earlier in his life was a drug dealer who would, carry a pager and dole out baggies of whatever was on special in Fort Greene Park over in slightly north of here. Yeah. And I said, that was a really neat story with the pagers and everything. Is it okay if we put that online for everybody to listen to? And he said, I'd rather you didn't. Not that I'm ashamed of it, not that I'm afraid for legal repercussions, but if this 3-minute clip is potentially the first and only way that people are going to get to know me, I'd rather it wasn't that.
Right.
And so I respect that. And I said, well, how about this other clip of you on stage at Fillmore telling me about that? And, we go with that or anything else. Oftentimes it's my favorite part is sitting with people who have notable stories. And, I always ask everybody, are you some kind of famous and I don't know it? And sometimes people are, and other times they're not. I was sitting with a model the other day, a fitness fashion model, and she said, I was very big in Kyrgyzstan. Many and now she's not as big as she was in Kyrgyzstan, but still a lovely lady. But I like to publish the aspects of people that haven't already been talked about 100 times. If their story is widely known, then I'd rather have them talk about going to the movies with their kids, or what the smell of a halal cart is like for non-New Yorkers who don't know. I oftentimes have everyone explain the particulars of their life, whether it's workplace jargon that I'm not familiar with, or religious doctrine and language that they grew up that's just plain as day to them. But I oftentimes will talk to Orthodox Jews and say, for folks who don't know the difference between a pupik and a punim, if you could lay that out for us, what those words mean in a way that a 10-year-old child from any cultural background or educational could easily understand. Yeah, that's the baseline common denominator. And having people explain what epistemology is, or cultural awareness, or what is a violence interrupter, what is an IT firewall, all these things. How did reggae music happen? And people who were, in on the ground level at all those fields, and having them explain it in a way that a 10-year-old child could understand. Right. It really kind of opens their brain in new ways.
Sure. Is it hard to pick folks that are going to participate?
No, not at all. No, every time I've done this, the applicant pool is much larger than the spots available.
Well, then you got to have some sort of screening capability, right? Like
True.
you got to exclude some people.
That's true. Right now, our one hard line is geographic, and it
Okay.
is south end of Prospect Park, which is the center of Brooklyn. And I say, if you live anywhere north of the south end of Prospect Park, you're ineligible. But if you live south of that one hard line
You're
down
in.
to the water that wraps around the rest of it, um, and on out to Queens, then you are eligible.
Yeah.
If you're in Fort Greene, you got to have somebody else paint your picture.
Do you ever, as you're looking at all the applicants that are out there, are you ever saying like, I wish I had this one type of person or something like that? Or is it just like, hey, this is what comes to me?
Both. It starts with just needing to get the ball rolling and leaving the applicant pool open. I tell everybody that I deliberately leave the application portal open the entire year, so that it's not just a picture of the first 200 people to have heard about it on
Right.
Facebook neighborhood groups or WNBC4 or Pix11 News, whoever ran the story. And I only post available dates for appointments every 2 weeks. So that way, if somebody just finds out about this in October and November, and they're all the way out in Mill Basin or wherever, they still have a shot at the November, December dates, and to make it as equitable as possible and to reach as broad an audience as possible. I always say that as a child of divorce, I have this ingrained fear of upsetting people, and I don't want anybody to be mad at me if they say, I didn't know that this was happening. So I leave the portal open, and that's how I sort of figure it out. However, when it comes time to decide who's in the picture and take an active hand in curating, I will consult with census data to say if this neighborhood is roughly 21% Bangladeshi, and I've got 100 people there, then I'm not doing math here, but we need to have X amount of Bangladesh.
Sure.
Otherwise, it's just not an accurate picture of the neighborhood.
Right.
And that means that I have to translate that flyer into Bangladeshi or Bangla, and put that up in local Bangladeshi restaurants and on the light posts and mailboxes outside of there, and consult with elected officials in the area to say, you have a bigger voice than I do. You speak to a broader audience. You put out a whole lot more flyers than I do. You retweet this. Can you share this on Facebook? Not to say as a crowdfunded thing, you guys should support and donate, but to say, can you just tell people that these opportunities are available to them for free?
Right. No, so I think it's interesting that you pull the demography in and you're actively looking at that. 200 portraits in a year. Is that a grueling task? How hard is that? I don't have much artistic ability, and I definitely have never undertaken painting a portrait. So I don't know how hard that is.
It's, one a day, 4 or 5 days a week isn't so bad for me, just production wise. If it was just the painting, then that's not so bad. The painting coupled with the framing, coupled with rounding up local and corporate sponsors and applying for grants and finding local venues who want to host these things and reaching out to museums to say, how's your 2024 looking? Because we've got these 200 things, and I think this would accurately reflect your audience in an unprecedented interactive way. That I think could be beneficial to everybody, but having to do all those things at the same time and post to social media and learn how to add captions to a TikTok video that thankfully I have a teenager in the house and they're like, here, dummy, let me show you. And so now I have a social media manager in the form of a 16-year-old child.
Well done.
They do great work.
Okay, so it's April. You're in the middle of this portion of your free portrait project. What would you is anything percolating into you where like, hey, this is somewhere I'd like to take this in the future?
Certainly. Yeah. I mean, I grew up all around the country. I was raised at an early age in Louisiana in a suburb of New Orleans, and the compound of that being a place from my youth that I'm somewhat distanced from now, coupled with climate change, always threatening to just swallow the city whole and water, makes me want to go back to New Orleans, do this work there. I also get a lot of requests from neighborhoods who are outside of my jurisdiction to say, will you come to Queens next? And I got a call from Google back in 2021, which, you know, of course sounded fishy, but apparently it was really Google. And they said, we'd like for you to come and paint a picture of our neighbors in Chelsea in a smaller scale, in a local community settlement house. And that was just, you know, 14 portraits in one place. But I do love the idea that there's a dreamy aspect of folks saying, come do us.
Yeah, right.
Like when you pick up a child and you throw them in the air and then they've got a brother and they're like, me next.
Yeah. It's very cool. All right. So as we think about how people can learn more about what you're doing, what's the best way for them to see what you're doing, consume your art, and maybe contribute to you in the future?
That would be great. Let's see. The easiest thing would be to probably to see us on Instagram, of all places right now.
Okay.
Instagram at We Are South Brooklyn has been the place that has the most up to the minute live footage of, you know, time-lapse video capture of these paintings happening in life, coupled with the oral histories overlaid, where you can hear people's voices while their painting is coming to life on camera, and then see the finished product. And thanks to my teenager, you can have captions if you happen to be hard of hearing like me, or if somebody has a very thick Haitian accent that, you know, is impenetrable to some. But to learn more, folks can also go to freeportraitproject.org.
Okay.
To see the entire thing in its past and present. And to support the work, there is a great big donate button in the top right-hand corner of the site, and our link in bio, etc., on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook. We're currently in the process of raising $113,000 to run this entire project for the year, to cover the studio rent, the paint, the brushes, and to keep me alive, to give myself a humble salary and pay for things like something better than a 2015 laptop that might pinwheel of death during somebody's audio recording.
Right.
And to provide food for these receptions and public gatherings, because food is what brings people together.
Yeah.
And to cover $10,000 in 200 picture frames.
Wow.
Yeah. Once you multiply anything by 200, it gets bigger.
Right. Who knew?
We have a fiscal sponsor that makes all donations to the project tax deductible. And we've had a number of corporate sponsors come on board. We had Blake Art Materials donate the paint for the year. A local art supply store called Artists and Craftsmen donated all 200 pieces of paper that are currently taped to these foam core boards while they dry. And even the foam core was donated by a local production company called John Creech Design Production. And they used the stuff for packing. But I said I could use a case of that to cut into these panels to dry my paintings on and act as supports for them. And he said, I'll send those over to you.
Nice. That's great. Well, Rusty, this was awesome. Thank you for sharing your story and helping us think about your community a little bit more.
Thank you. Thanks for being here. Thanks for having me. And thanks for letting me share.